Playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good evening, fellow travellers, lovely people. Welcome along. It's Neil Oliver live on GB News TV and on radio. Tonight on the programme, as the crisis in Gaza intensifies, I'll speak to retired US Army Colonel Douglas McGregor about the situation. We'll also be joined by Ralph Scholhammer, an Assistant Professor in Political Science and Economics, to discuss the continuing crisis facing humanity. And then, on a very different note, we'll be getting news from Dorchester, where they've been trying to set a world record for the most people dressed as ghosts to gather in one place. Yes, I did hear myself saying that out loud. All of that and plenty of chat with my excellent panellist, Andrew Eborn. But first, an update on the latest news from Aaron Armstrong.
It's 6 o'clock. Very good evening to you. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB Newsroom. Gaza suffered its heaviest bombardment since the conflict began, with artillery fire and airstrikes pounding the enclave since last night. Israel says its forces are still in the field, attacking above and below ground as part of its expanded offensive against Hamas. All communications in Gaza remain down, meaning no new casualty figures have been released. The military says trucks carrying food, water and medical supplies will be allowed in, raising hopes of a pause in the fighting. But aid agencies say a humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding, and all residents have again been told to relocate immediately amid intense hostilities.
For your immediate safety, we urge all residents of northern Gaza and Gaza City to temporarily relocate south. Let me repeat. We urge all residents of northern Gaza and Gaza City to relocate south immediately. This is a temporary measure. Moving back to northern Gaza will be possible once the intense hostilities end.
Meanwhile, sirens and missiles have been heard in Tel Aviv. Well, these pictures show a series of missiles launched from Gaza towards the Israeli city being intercepted by the Iron Dome defences. There are reports, though, that one rocket may have struck an area in the east of the city. It's unclear if there are any casualties. Around 100,000 people have taken to the streets of London today demanding a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. One person was arrested after a police officer was assaulted at a rally near Downing Street. The Met Police says the officer was taken to hospital. Elsewhere, more than 200 people staged a sit-in on the concourse of Waterloo Station. The Met has warned officers will intervene if protesters are deemed to be supporting terrorism. There's no relief in sight to a record backlog of Crown Court trials. That's according to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Max Hill, KC, who's stepping down this month, says a shortage of barristers and judges is clogging up the system. He says cases are at an all-time high, and while the judiciary's been expanded slightly, it's not enough to alleviate the pressure. Latest figures show more than 65,000 cases are still awaiting trial. Former leadership candidate for the SNP, Ash Regan, has defected, joining the ranks of rival Alba Party. She's become Alba's first MSP and says her old party has lost its focus on independence. Alba rivals the SNP as a pro-independence party and was set up by former First Minister Alex Salmond. Humza Yousaf has played down the defection, though, saying it's no great loss, and he's not surprised. A proposal to close rail ticket offices has resulted in the biggest ever response to a public consultation. The RMT union says around 750,000 passengers have had their say ahead of an expected announcement on the future of ticket offices at train stations. And the union's head, Mick Lynch, is warning the government against the closure, saying 98% of those who did respond are opposed to the controversial plan. Around £7 million of taxpayers' money has been spent renovating the home of the Speaker of the House of Commons. Since Sir Lindsay Hoyle took office in 2019, more than £1 million a year has been spent on the property, including on staterooms and offices. And the figures, which were released in a Freedom of Information request, don't specify how much was spent on furnishings compared to structural improvements. The Telegraph is reporting some of the money, though, has been spent on silverware. Forecasters are warning of further flooding to areas of the country still reeling from the effects of Storm Babette. Yellow weather warnings are in place for the east coast of Scotland, Northern Ireland and the south of England this weekend. Heavy rain and winds of up to 70 miles an hour will affect some parts of the country. A shopping centre in Hastings in East Sussex had to be evacuated earlier because of flooding, and some rail services in Scotland have been suspended following that damage caused by Storm Babette. And if you've ever waited too long to use a gift voucher, well, spare a thought for the new owner of this coin. It's one of only 50 tokens created in 1766, one of perhaps 20 that are still in use, that allows its owner free access to every show at the Old Vic Theatre in Bristol. It was auctioned a little earlier today, selling for just over £9,000. And the good news for the new owner, despite being nearly 260 years old, the Old Vic says it will honour its word. So the new owner has access to all tickets for all shows, if indeed they want them. This is GB News. That's it for the moment from me. I'll be back with more at 7 o'clock. Now it's over to Neil.
Dreadful things keep happening because dreadful people are in charge of the world but face no consequences for their dreadful actions. Since 9/11 and the beginning of the forever war on terror, millions of civilians have been killed in a blood-drenched swathe of territory in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Yemen and many more places besides. Always we're told it's for the greater good, that we must accept the collateral deaths of the innocent as well as the guilty. Always it's civilians that die in the greatest numbers, like grass harvested or trampled underfoot. Modern wars are prosecuted to keep the powerful in power and to make the rich richer. Provoked or not, the answer is always war. As often as not, they're about oil, the removal of inconvenient, uncooperative regimes and their replacement with those deemed compliant. The rich and powerful insist they act only to make the world a better, safer place. Is that right? All I see are piles of corpses, heaps of rubble, and a world made more dangerous every day for the likes of you and me. I say the likes of US Presidents W. Bush, Clinton, Bill, of course, and also Hillary, and Obama are dreadful people with blood on their hands. So too past British Prime Minister Tony Blair, also dreadful. He and his little wizards lied about weapons of mass destruction in the arsenal of Saddam Hussein, and then he and George Bush launched an illegal war. If you don't believe me that that war was deemed illegal, then how about the word of Kofi Annan, then Secretary-General of the United Nations, who said in 2004, "I have indicated that it's not in accordance with the UN Charter. From our point of view and the UN Charter point of view, the war was illegal." The world is littered with ageing ghouls, bloody to their elbows, but somehow hailed as statesmen, their cynical advice eagerly sought by their successors. And in spite of the body counts, in spite of illegality, in spite of the deliberately fomented international instability, in spite of the revolving door between politics and the military-industrial complex that sees the suits serve their time in elected office declaring wars and signing off on billion-dollar contracts to arms manufacturers before quitting the scenes of their crimes and taking up lucrative executive positions with the Boeings, Raytheons and Northrop Grummans of the world, never are there consequences for any of them, not in this life at least. It's not fingerprints that are left behind by the guilty parties. It's news stories and sometimes even recordings of their voices calling for the necessary dirty work. In early 2014, civil war broke out in the Donbass region of Ukraine after a US-backed coup d'etat cleared away the Russian-favouring government in Kiev. The coup was the work of Victoria Nuland, then US Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs. Nuland talked about it all in a phone call to the then US Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt. And we know this because someone leaked a recording of it all. Nuland and Pyatt discussed who was to be the next Prime Minister of Ukraine. Nuland wanted anti-Russian Arseny Yatsenyuk. In her own words, "I think Yats is the guy." Pyatt warned her the Europeans might not support Yatsenyuk, to which she replied, "F the EU," except she didn't limit herself to the letter F. Yatsenyuk ended up as Prime Minister right enough. And the rest, including the latest war there, bar the shouting, is history. Any consequences for Nuland? Well, in 2021 she was made Under-Secretary of State for Political Affairs, so that's nice for Victoria. The desiccating ghouls are everywhere. Former US Speaker Nancy Pelosi's net worth has rocketed since the 2008 financial crisis, with the help of her husband's lucrative stock trades. She's one of the richest people in Congress, pocketing $140 million since the crash. And while she strenuously denies sharing information with her husband, venture capitalist Paul Pelosi, many and angry have been the questions asked about trades made by Paul that just happened to coincide with major decisions by her Congress. I say again that dreadful things keep happening because dreadful people are in charge and suffer no consequences. I also say those dreadful people are invariably cowards, which partly explains why they do those dreadful things, or at least stand by while dreadful events unfold. Cowards are easy to spot, just as dreadful people are easy to spot, just as weak people are easy to spot, for they'll sacrifice, actively or passively, anyone and everyone they perceive as a threat to their position and burgeoning wealth. And so French Macron, Canadian Trudeau and Kiwi Ardern and more besides keep stepping backwards while simultaneously nudging their populations forwards into harm's way. Another British former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, locked down the country in lockstep with all the rest, leading to death and economic destruction on an unmeasured scale, and pushed medical products that were questionably neither safe nor effective, not even in terms of Big Pharma's own self-regulating policies, on millions of people, children included. He was the NATO bag carrier who scuppered hopes of an early peace deal in Ukraine. Like Blair, like the Clintons, like Obama and the rest, he's now on the luxury lecture circuit, trousering a fortune along the way. The wages of sin, as it turns out, come in 7 figures, or 8. Well, that's my guess. In the 20th century, it was primarily war that the dreadful people turned to for the purposes of keeping themselves safe. Now it's more sinister and certainly more cold-blooded, as the powers that be increasingly and enthusiastically enter into unholy partnerships with big business and the central banks. This is the naked fascism of stakeholder capitalism, The even more unforgivable, cynical sacrifice of people and the well-being of people on the altar of profit. Our rights are erased, freedoms are erased, and a person would have to be blind to fail to notice that while the bullets fly and the blood flows, all manner of legislation scuttles through our various parliaments like thieves in the night, systematically and inch by inch stealing our ways of life. The online safety bill to arguably censor dissent, the energy bill giving fascist power to kick in the doors of private homes, and next on the slate, the amendments to the international health regulations that are foundational to the WHO's Pandemic Preparedness Treaty. Unless our elected representatives, those we pay for and that notionally serve us, take action before December, by default our national sovereignty will slip from our hands and into those of the unelected, faceless, unaccountable servants of the World Health Organization. They'll tell us when there's an international health emergency, and that could easily be on the grounds of their arguably questionable interpretation of the climate crisis. And if so, what the likes of you and me have to do as a result, including being potentially locked down and ordered to submit to medical procedures. And will our Prime Minister or any of our MPs act to ensure none of this is possible for the people of Britain? I suspect at most that a shiver runs along the benches in the chamber of the Palace of Westminster, desperately in search of a spine to run down. One or two, perhaps, the usual honourable exceptions. Thank you, Andrew Bridgen, as always, stand in plaintive defence of ancient liberty, but not enough, not nearly enough to prevent the inevitable hammering into place of the final nail in the coffin of our freedom. The cowards have taken over, and now we see how much harm weak men and weak women can cause. I ask again, where are the consequences for any of this? Will we ever again see anyone fall on their sword, accept their failure and go? In 937 AD, a battle was fought at a place called Brunanburh, likely somewhere near the Mersey in England's west. Two armies clashed, one led by King Athelstan of the Anglo-Saxons, the other a Norse-Celtic alliance led by King Constantine of the Scots. Those that fought in that battle had never known anything so terrible in its scale and violence. None that witnessed Brunanburh or heard about Brunanburh ever forgot it. For generations it was remembered as the Great War. The two armies fought from sunup until sundown, and then, the results still unclear, withdrew from one another to contemplate terrible wounds, terrible heaps of slain. As a consequence of Brunanburh in 937, a line was drawn once and for all, separating a smaller kingdom in the north of the Long Island of Britain from a larger kingdom in the south. In that way were the destinies of Scotland and England set in train. King Constantine's own son, not spared the draft, you might say, died in the fighting. And some few years afterwards, a reign of more than 40 years, he walked away from his unchallenged throne forever. Having seen enough, and likely fearing for his immortal soul, he lived out the rest of his life as a penitent in a cave on the east coast of Scotland near St Andrews. Once upon a time we were warriors and led by warriors, and sometimes those warriors with more blood on their hands than could ever be washed away turned their backs on power and sought forgiveness instead. Not anymore. Now there's new horror in the old world of the Middle East. I condemn and totally and without qualification any wickedness that kills civilians, children and babies being especially innocent and utterly undeserving of anything of the sort. Who will suffer the consequences of whatever nightmares unfold as Russia, China, the US, Iran, Turkey, Egypt, Jordan and Syria must make their moves? Will the fighting-age children of leaders of nation-states, those bellicose men and women in designer suits, eager for all-out war, be compelled to take part in any draft for a ground invasion of Gaza or elsewhere in the region? Will those same leaders stand over the bodies of the slain, civilian dead among them, children too, and declare that all's fair in love and war? Will they leave office when the dust settles and set out in pursuit of lucrative new jobs or speaking tours paying $1 million a time? And will the deadly consequences play out only for the people who always suffer, civilians, black, white and brown, and of whatever creed? Here's the thing, we're set at each other's throats by those who don't give a damn about any of us. Not Christians, not Jews, not Muslims, or anyone else. Instead of joining in baying for more blood, we should see it all for what it is, the ugliest, most brutal, most obscene game of all. It's time we the people stopped watching them play it. If not for us, then for our children, and for everyone's children. That's just my opinion, of course. You're free to disagree. Tweet and email throughout the show. You can email gbviews@gbnews.com. You can tweet me as well at GB News, and I'll try to get to comments during the show. Well, joining me throughout tonight's show is broadcaster and lawyer Andrew Eborn. Andrew, your reaction? Good to see you.
I have to say, we're in dreadful times. Nobody could possibly object to that. I think we are. It is some of the most obscene things which are happening at the moment. And they always say that the first casualty in war is the truth. And it's good that you're here to hold people's feet to the fire and to call it out. There are some things, obviously, in the interest of balance, and often my role is to play devil's advocate to ensure that those who are not here to represent that would basically have their voice heard. And you mentioned about Boris. We should obviously declare it was announced yesterday that he's going to be coming here as a presenter. And people will say that he got an 80-seat majority. He was the Heineken politician, if you like. He reached parts of the electorate that other politicians couldn't reach, is what they said. He then turned into a Marmite character with his Peppa Pig and Porky Pies and an avalanche of alliterations. There are all sorts of things there. But the great thing, if you want to draw a crowd, start a fight. So as long as this is a platform on which you can debate these things and basically challenge people as appropriate, that's got to be right. But I'm totally with you on war. It's completely senseless. And the tragedy, this horrific scenes that we're seeing day in, day out, is absolutely obscene.
I'm also joined by academic Ralph Schulhammer. Thanks for making time for us this evening, Ralph. When you look on at what's happening in that crucible in the Middle East and the potential thereof, what's your gut reaction?
Well, I think the first gut reaction is that one thing we have to realise from London to Brussels to Washington is that the world is not by nature an ordered place. I think this is becoming ever more clear. We did, through the 90s and the early 2000s, we kind of took a lot for granted, right? The idea that there's a hierarchy in the world, that things are ordered, that everybody wants the same that we want. And I think we increasingly find out that that is not the case. So in many ways, this is a realignment with reality. And if those, as you mentioned it before, right, if those who are in charge not realize this very soon, I think there is a chance that these things are spiraling out of control. I think we have not been in the last 30 to 40 years that close to something really resembling World War III. And again, I'm not saying this as clickbait or panic, but this is, we see it, and we see it also now in the conflict in Israel, because even the Israelis know what happens if this spirals out, what really kind of, if Hezbollah gets in, right, if Iran gets in, if the United States, as Lindsey Graham said, bomb Iran's refineries, which is completely insane, right? These people have no idea what would happen if they get their wish. There are second, third order effects, right? China is behind Iran, Russia is there.
How can that be? These people, at the very least, exist in the same world as you and me, and they're watching at least some of the same coverage. How can these people, like Graham, suggest, outright attack by the US on Iran without speculating at least what might be the consequences?
Well, I think about this. We once had politicians like Winston Churchill who wrote books while he was Prime Minister. John F. Kennedy wrote book reviews while he was on the campaign trail. We simply no longer have that kind of politicians. We have an education, we have a knowledge problem in our political class. I mean, it's quite serious. We have it, by the way, also in the media. Maybe some of you viewers noticed, like CNN published recently a map of Israel where they completely botched where was it. They put Sderot into the West Bank, and Tel Aviv were actually Haifa. They completely botched it up. We don't know anything anymore, and we'll talk about this later, because I think that's one of the symptoms of multiculturalism. If everything is of equal value, what's the point of knowing anything about anything?
And the extraordinary thing as well, isn't it, they all say history repeats itself, and the reason for that is people
but they don't know history.
Well, exactly. People don't basically learn the lessons from history. And you look at these things, we've talked about this often, you look at this and what is a very predictable course. If you follow this sort of horrible narrative and the terrible sort of speak, if you like, that happens in these situations.
But that's the thing, right? Everybody's looking for the narrative. I mean, we see now whether it's Russia, Ukraine, whether it's Israel, Palestine, and everybody says, which is my team? On which side do I have? There is, I know this is hard to say, and I'm not using the word context, but there is countries, populations think differently, right? The Chinese look different at the world. The Russians look different at the world. I'm not saying that this is a view I share, but the point of diplomacy once was to say, how does the other guy look at the world, and what does this mean for us? We no longer do this. We look at this and think, oh, they just think like us, and if they say something else, they don't really mean it. And then when they really mean it, we act very surprised.
And the worst thing is we live in a diseased information world, don't we, where there's a lot of division. And as soon as you have the sort of narrative being poisoned in this way, that division increases.
Yeah. We had Brett Weinstein, evolutionary biologist, on last week, and he was saying that it's simply the case that the opposing forces now are too powerful. We've all got the same terrifying technologies, and the old model of one group bumping off another group to gain some kind of advantage, it's not it's not to be allowed because we pose too much of a realistic threat to one another. We have to find ways to cooperate, comfortably or uncomfortably.
Right, and I think for this we need to talk. As we also said, right, one point of diplomacy was also you talk with the people you don't like and not just with the people you like, right? Yeah. Being US ambassador to Canada is not very exciting. US ambassador to Russia is a different story. And I think this is what we have to relearn. The 19th century, when we had politicians, you know, of the caliber of a Gladstone and a Palmerston, they knew this, right? You get together, you lock yourself up in a room, you have all the maps on the wall, and you don't leave the room until you hammer out an agreement.
George or not war is what they said.
Exactly.
Coming up next, we will be hearing from Colonel Douglas Macgregor as the crisis in the Middle East, as we've been discussing, continues to cause huge concern throughout the world. See you in a few minutes.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. There's no getting away from the tragic situation in the Middle East as the conflict between Israel and Hamas continues. Here to give us his take on the crisis and to update us on the mood in the United States, I'm joined from Northern Virginia by retired Army Colonel Douglas Macgregor. Good evening, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Sure. Good evening.
The US are ramping up. Israel has said it will wipe Iran off the face of the earth if Hezbollah intervenes in Gaza. Turkey offers to mediate. Well, Secretary of State Blinken says US not interested. What happens next, Colonel?
Well, first, Neil, let me say that you're a tough act to follow. I couldn't find anything that you said at the outset of the program that I could not agree with. And I would go one step further and mention that Professor Scholhammer's comments about the world aligning with reality as opposed to this post-war order that is crumbling around it is spot on. And Israel, of course, is part of that old order. I think what's happened in Washington is very simple. Israel commands the hype in Washington. Thanks to the distribution of wealth, that means large numbers of people in the Senate and the House have signed on because they've effectively been purchased. Their votes are 100% with Israel. There's also a certain amount of sentimentality attached to that, but I wouldn't underestimate the impact of greed in Washington. Then there's ignorance of the world, no understanding whatsoever of the danger in which Israel finds itself right now. Israel set out, in theory, to destroy Hamas. It is now confronting an increasingly united Islamic world. In fact, for the first time in 1,000 years, you have the Shiites and the Sunni who are united with one purpose, that is to stop Israel, halt this bloodletting, end what's happening in Gaza. Instead of responding to this, the President of the United States historically always has, you're escalating. And this is something I think that Mr. Netanyahu is betting on very heavily, that Israel, together with our military power, can ultimately prevail. And I think that's a very serious mistake. Our army is smaller than it's ever been. Most of its combat power is pointlessly deployed in places like Poland and Romania and Baltic states, where it's supposed to defend against Russia, which has no intention whatsoever of attacking Eastern Europe. Then most of our air power is not what it was 30 years ago. This is not 1991. We can't put 5,000 fighters in the air and hundreds of bombers. We put 4 carrier battle groups into the region, 2 up in the Mediterranean, 1 in the Persian Gulf, and probably 1 in the Red Sea. But their sortie rates are very limited. They've got to fly a long distance to deliver their bombs, their ordnance, or quite frankly, they risk losing those ships. In other words, the technology has changed. The way wars are being fought has changed. We haven't kept up with that. And then finally, the President of the United States could end all of this very quickly. He could simply tell Mr. Netanyahu, that's it. No further. Stop. And at that point, the Israeli military establishment would have to hold its operation. At the same time, it could be a meeting with the Turks and the Iranians and essentially say, it's time for us to sort out this trial, come up with a solution. But no one will go there.
How could it be, Colonel, that it would appear that the US is contemplating a Middle East that no longer exists, that they're contemplating dealing with the Middle East of, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago? How can that be?
Well, you've just described a condition that afflicts Washington. Washington lives in the past. Washington lives perpetually in 1991. All you have to do is listen to the politicians, especially Biden, speak. He gave a speech the other night and made it sound as though we were on the threshold of World War II. We all have to mobilize. This is utter insanity. We don't live in that world. The world of 91 is long since past. We are perhaps the greatest of the great powers, but we're not the only superpower. We are absolutely not the indispensable nation. Most regional problems need to be solved by the people who live in those regions, not us. And our insistence on intervention and on interference has created chaos in the Middle East. This is something no one in Washington either understands or, even if they did, would care to admit.
What is the likely future that you imagine or envision for Israel when you look 2 and 3 moves ahead in what might be inevitable? What happens to Israel?
Well, my argument is that we need to save Israel from itself. This is something I've said from the very beginning. I'm not anxious to see Israel destroyed. I'm not anxious to see millions of people, whether they live in Egypt, Syria, or Jordan, or anyone else, be killed. But right now, we are on a very dangerous path, let's be frank. The Arab states that surround Israel are not the same as they were 40 years ago or 50 years ago in 1973. They have more technology, more capability. Their populations are better educated and more capable as a result. And to this, you must add Iran, enormous air and space power, very sophisticated leadership, a bureaucratic power in its armed forces. To this, you must also add Turkey, The Turks have the largest army in NATO, the largest armed forces, period. They're ferocious fighters, and they are deeply committed to ending the affront to Sunni Islam. This means we're headed for a regional war, and once it's joined, it will be very difficult for us to stop it. I think the world, at least in the Middle East, is waiting for the President of the United States to step forward and say, that's enough. We in the West, we in the United States are de-escalating. And that would signal to the Israelis that there has to be some sort of arrangement, a new arrangement that addresses these concerns. They don't want to do that. Now, I'm not saying all Israelis don't want to do it. There are probably at least 40% of the Israeli electorate that agrees with you and everything you said at the beginning. But they're not in power. And I would tell you that most Americans pay no attention to anything that happens beyond their borders, least of all in the Middle East. They're sitting there saying, oh, well, this is just another Middle East war. Let's help the Israelis. It'll be over in a few weeks. They don't understand what's changed either, and no one is telling them.
Colonel, bear with me while I just get a response from a guest that I have in the studio with me. Ralph, I find that a very believable, but very frightening assessment of a situation. How do you feel listening to the Colonel there?
I completely agree with the Colonel. I would maybe just add one wrinkle, and I think we'll find agreement there as well, which is, of course, that particularly for the Arab states, the Israel-Palestine conflict is also of domestic interest for them. I mean, generally, I don't think that the government in Saudi Arabia or the government in Egypt really wants to go to war on behalf of Hamas. But, of course, they know, as the Colonel correctly pointed out, that their population sees it differently. So they try now to threat, and I hope that they're successful. This brings us back to what we said before. Do we have politicians talented enough, skilled enough in diplomacy to make this happen, to thread this very fine needle, to allow Israel to respond, to kind of satisfy the, let's say, the domestic current coalition in power in Israel, but at the same time, kind of not provoke the Arab street. So this is a very, very difficult thing to do. And yeah, if they make a misstep, this could be really, really troublesome.
And Andrew, obviously, you know, how do you feel? I mean, I listened to the Colonel, I listened to him elsewhere, and there's something, you know, they're very straightforward and cogent about that argument. Yeah. This is just a situation that escalates inevitably.
And it is interesting. I mean, he made some very interesting point about Washington being stuck in 1991, and there are so many questions to be answered. I was talking to a number of people about Benjamin Netanyahu, and they're saying that he's finished on this sort of basis. How did one of the best security forces in the world allow this to slip? And all sorts of speculations, all sorts of conspiracy theories come out as a result of it. Wag the dog, start a war to unite people, and so on and so forth. You need to look at this, but remember that there are human lives at the end of it. And I think in amongst all this narrative, that's the problem. And the poison that we see in social media is now spilling out onto the streets.
Colonel, is there anyone close, anywhere near President Biden, who might be giving him at least some vestige of the theory and the logic that you're offering this evening?
I doubt it. Washington is a very strange place. First of all, think of Washington as this impenetrable bubble. The people sitting on the Hill in Washington have no more appreciation for the impact of inflation on the average American family or the impact of immigration on the average American family than they have any appreciation for what's happening in the Middle East. And frankly, most of them, I don't think, care. They've got their hands out for cash. And cash comes from many sources. All of those sources are pro-war. Once again, because there's no appreciation for the dangers involved. I think at the end of the discussion, there is a very important point that Professor Scholhammer made, and that is General Sisi in Egypt has worked tirelessly to maintain good relations with Israel. The last thing that he wants is a war. That's true for King Abdullah in Jordan. I would argue it's true for virtually everybody. But they don't have much choice. And the question is, how many more thousands of Palestinians have to die in the bombings before someone sobers up? Does it have to happen after Hezbollah attacks? Because Hezbollah will inflict terrible losses on the Israelis. Or are we just committed unconditionally to fight this until Israel itself is destroyed? And that's my greatest fear, that it will reach that point where we can't pull back any longer and we cannot rescue the Israelis.
I have to go to a break for a few moments, but please stay with us, Colonel McGregor, and obviously we'll be picking up this conversation. Stay with us for a few minutes.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Welcome back, where we can pick up this conversation about the tragic situation in the Middle East. And I'd like to pick it up first of all with Professor Schulhammer. It seems insane to me, after many years of multiculturalism, mass immigration, all of these cultures which have not assimilated, have not integrated, they're living parallel lives throughout Europe and here in Britain, that after all of that, and we were being told that that was the right thing to do, to now poke a stick into what is effectively a wasp's nest. Why now? It seems like madness to me.
I think it's madness, but it goes to my big issue with multiculturalism is always it's actually the laziest of all ideologies, right? If Andrew says, you're a communist, and I say I'm a fascist, we immediately would have an argument, right? Because these are really clashing oppositions. But the idea of multiculturalism was always basically everything is of equal value. Like the core value of multiculturalism is not to have a core value. So all these people that came, we never really showed an interest in them, right? The idea was whatever they bring, it doesn't matter. Their values, my values, it's all the same. And as you say, we completely ignored, we still ignore. Many of those groups don't like each other, right? So we don't just import a clash between the quote-unquote, white British population and immigration. It's also among immigration groups. We never made an effort to actually look at what those people think, what they believe. Ironically, the true multiculturalists, the much-stamped British imperialists, they learned obscure languages in the last corner of the planet. They would have been curious who is coming to Britain, what do they think, what do they believe, what does it mean, what is taught in the schools, what is preached in the mosques. We turned a blind eye to it, and now, as you correctly say, we are all surprised that this is all of a sudden happening.
Andrew, are we victims of our own ignorance?
Oh, I think absolutely. And again, we were making such clear points beforehand. People forget the whole history of it. Suella Braverman was saying, look, multiculturalism doesn't work. It's all about integration. But the interesting thing, and we touched on this in the break, because obviously the dialogue continues, is what is the solution? Because I think all four of us agree at the moment about the problems and the reason we've got here. And we can see a horrendous future unless people address that. So maybe we should lag it. What are the solutions?
Colonel McGregor, is there a way out? I mean, are you optimistic or pessimistic that there's a way that can be navigated here, or are we actually just going to have to watch a car crash and then pick through the wreckage?
President Biden appears to be largely a cutout, largely a facade. The people who are governing country are a combination of elected and unelected people that are, in Western terms, what we call in the Soviet or post-Soviet world, oligarchs. I don't see how you turn them off. The biggest problem is that whereas Putin and Xi, for instance, both have a very, very acute sense of limitations. They know what is or is not possible. They have long memories that involve wars that did enormous damage to them. In the United States, there is no sense of limitation right now. There's no sense that we only have so many resources. In fact, it's the opposite. You heard President Biden reading from the speech that was written for him. The United States of America can do anything. We can finance multiple wars at the same time. We can do anything. We are the America of the Second World War. Well, that America, Neil, never really existed anyway. We were always limited in what we could do. In fact, that's why Eisenhower made such an excellent president. He understood that we could never fight another war like that again in our history. We've lost all of that. There's no fear of the consequences. As a result, I'm not very optimistic. I think that we are going to march down this path into hell, a hell, frankly, of our own making, and one that is unnecessary.
When did the sophistication and the nuance and the appreciation, as Ralph Schulhammer was saying, this idea that, we used to pay attention to one another's cultures. There was a time when there was a curiosity and there was, there was an attempt made to assimilate and to make room for. When did we lose that sensitivity to other people?
I think it began in the aftermath of the Second World War, and it's gotten progressively worse over the years. And unfortunately, this sense of superpower uniqueness in the 1990s simply accelerated the problem. And now, none of it is true. Americans are not stupid people. They're looking at immigration and they're waking up to a nightmare. They're saying, well, wait a minute, these people haven't come here to become Americans. Well, of course not. They're setting up their own countries with their own grievances, their own preferences, their own set of hatreds on our soil. We don't like it. We don't want it. Well, it's here. And the question that I continue to ask is, where have you been? Well, the people were asleep. They were too busy watching television, too busy enjoying the good life. And they were dismissing problems out of hand. And they listened to the propaganda. If you raise questions, well, you must be a bigot. If you don't like something, you're an anti-Semite. On and on and on. And Americans are not any of those things by nature. In fact, I think we're shamelessly tolerant, something which I blame in part the British for. We're too damn tolerant. And it's costing us dearly here at home, and it's going to cost us overseas.
Ralph, who do you blame for this loss? If we're agreed that there's just been a loss of nuance, a loss of awareness, a loss of paying attention, who has driven that retrograde step?
Well, I think a lot of it, and I'm curious to hear the other members of the panel on this, I think a lot of this, there is a sense of, and I think this was driven particularly after World War II, I think there is a sense of kind of collective guilt within the West, right? That we have to atone for what we have done to other cultures, imperialism, colonialism. And I think that's partially true, although if you take a closer look again at history, you'll see everybody was imperialist, everybody was colonialist. Isn't that something that the Europeans invented? If I would be cynical, I would say in some cases we were just better than the rest. But I think there's now this idea that we have to atone for this. and you see this then in the immigration debate. It's kind of, come to us, we will not ask you to change, we will not ask you to integrate, and this is then us showing that now we are no longer these bad people that we were in the past. That on the long run, I think we don't do these people a favor. It's also important to mention, because if you don't offer someone to integrate into, what do we expect, right? I can tell you, in Austria and Germany, people come and the first thing you hear people say is, well, we are so sorry we are German. Why would anybody who come integrate into this? You want to integrate into a culture that is confident. You want to integrate into a culture that has a backbone. I mean, it is no coincidence, right, that people like, Andrew Tate convert to Islam because it has swagger, right? It seems like something that they stand up for what they believe in. We might disagree with what they believe in, but at least they stand up for it. And that has, I would say, a certain attraction, particularly for young people. And where do we see kind of the most attraction to it? Among young people. And I think we are, again, this is a very risky game we're playing.
It's a fascinating conversation. I have to say, on behalf of everyone here and Colonel McGregor, it's such a relief to me, at least, to hear this conversation take place on mainstream television, because at least, if there's to be any hope at all, it's based on people getting this kind of general understanding of the scale of the problem. So, Colonel McGregor, thank you so much for making time for us this evening, and I hope our paths cross again soon. Thank you. And thank you both as well. That was just, at least it was an airing of some of the problems. We've got another break, after which maybe, well, you might say it's a bit of a palate cleanse, something much lighter. It'll be about the Halloween spirit and learning about a new world record attempt. If it sounds spooktacular, you're not wrong. Yes, you did hear me say that. See you in a couple.
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I have long had a fascination with the notion of haunting. you know, what it means to have that sense of something strange. I've got a new book out, which I will shamelessly publicise. It's called Hauntings, a book of ghosts and where to find them. And so it's fair to say that it's a bit of a self-indulgence, you know, for me to be introducing this topic on here. It's Halloween on Tuesday night. But the spookiness began earlier today with a world record attempt in the historic town of Dorchester. The record for the most people to gather in one spot dressed as ghosts is 560, Andrew. But did it get beaten this afternoon? Now, I'm just hearing that our guest has been spirited away.
Oh, no!
We have a guest who should have been down the line, but something strange has happened, Andrew.
Yeah, how strange. Well, I did know it was 560 because it was in Ireland in 2017. What I also found fascinating is that there's a similar attempt in Ohio at the moment, and I haven't heard the results of that one either.
There's something for me that I sort of investigate in book, that we've been telling each other ghost stories forever.
Oh, we love it.
I mean, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is older than the Bible, is a ghost story in some respects. And from that point on, for as long as we've had writing, we've written down ghost stories. What is that preoccupation?
Well, we're a nation, and we're a world of storytellers, aren't we? That's the great thing. We've got them back.
I've got Tara. I've got Tara. Tara has manifest. Hello, Tara. Was there a new record set this afternoon in Dorchester?
There was a world record in the way that for Dorchester, for sure, but not a world record. No.
Oh no!
So tell us all about it. What did unfold? How many spooky people were there?
So we had over 200 people here, which is great, considering the weather was absolutely appalling. Lots of families, lots of fun. Really good turnout considering the weather. We're really happy.
What would you say? We've been talking here, I don't know if you were able to hear us, but Andrew and I have been talking about this preoccupation, this obsession that so many people seem to have with the very notion of ghosts and haunting. How do you seek to understand that part of the human psyche?
Gosh, there's a question. I don't think I could ever understand it. I know that in Dorchester, there's a long tradition of ghost sightings and a lot of history. It goes back to the time of Judge Jeffrey, for example, who was known for sentencing well over 380 people to be hung. And people are said to come back to haunt Judge Jeffrey.
Andrew, is it something that you share? Is there an experience that you can share with us where, just for whatever reason, you felt the hackles rise, a sense of something else?
Well, every time I come to the studio with you, Neil, I feel a sense of something else. I think it is close. It would be arrogant of us to think that this is it. This is the only life that we live. And I believe in energy, and I believe that that energy must survive after we go to different places, whatever your different views. But I love it. We are fascinated with ghosts, and I think it's our sort of wish, if you like, for immortality.
Tara, is Halloween as a celebration, a festival, whatever you want to call it, has it made a comeback? I'm very aware that in my lifetime, my children were very much encouraged when they were growing up by school and everyone else to get into the Halloween spirit. Is it something that we've taken more to heart than we used to?
I absolutely think so. During this past week, which is half term here in Dorset, we've been running a witch hunt, a Halloween hunt, a trick-or-treat around the shopping centre, and it's been absolutely huge. You've had 200-300 families coming through the square every single day, all dressed up in their fancy dress, and they absolutely love it. Pumpkin carving in the square. It's, much bigger, I think, than it used to be.
Lovely stuff, Tara. Thank you for giving us a light and spiritual end to the show. That's all for me on Neil Oliver Live for this week. Thanks to all my guests, Andrew especially, who's still with me, Professor Al Schulhammer and the Colonel, Douglas McGregor. Next up, it's the Saturday 5.
Good evening, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it's been a pretty unsettled start to the weekend, and that's all due to this large area of low pressure out to the west of the UK, bringing some tighter isobars across the north and south, so some stronger winds here as we go into tonight. Heavy rain making its way northwards and bringing some pretty heavy bursts across southern parts of Wales and southeast England. Well, we'll see some strong gusty winds too. That rain continuing to make its way north through northern England, Northern Ireland, and then later into Scotland as we go into the early hours of Sunday. So a pretty gloomy, wet start here. Some brighter skies across central and eastern parts of England, but for southern and western coasts, it's another blustery day with frequent showers that could bring the odd rumble of thunder as well as we go into the second part of the weekend. Some sunny spells too, and feeling pretty pleasant in the sunshine with highs of 13 to 15. So as we go into the new working week, that rain will continue across eastern Scotland, becoming a little more patchy in nature though. Elsewhere, it's another day of sunshine and showers. These still most frequent and heaviest across southern and western coasts, and that continuing as we go into the new week. But temperatures starting to drop a little in the north as we go towards midweek.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time.